everyone. Welcome to the Maricopa Public Library. My name is Mr. Andy and I'm the youth librarian here at the library. And welcome to our second episode of Off the Page, Book Club for Tweens. And in this month of August, we are going over the book Pi by Sarah Weeks. So last week, we went through chapters 1 through 3 with their summaries and asked some trivia questions to go along with those chapters. Today we are picking up right where we left off with chapters 4 all the way through 6. So before we start getting into some of those trivia questions, let's begin by kind of recapping on some of the characters that we have in our story. So on our list of characters, we have Alice Anderson. She's the niece of Polly Portman. Polly Portman, famous pie baker who won 13 Blueberry Awards, and Alice's aunt, like we just said. Charlie Erdling, Aunt Polly's errand boy, Alice's best friend. George Anderson, Alice's dad. Ruth Anderson, Alice's mom and Aunt Polly's sister. Reverend Flowers was given Pie, the shop pie, in Polly's will. Miss Girk, a principal. She doesn't like students to be tardy, and she is a bodybuilder. Kind of cool. Mrs. Needleman, managing her husband's mayor campaign, later becomes mayor herself, and she is Nora's mother. Mayor Needleman, running for re-election, that's Nora's father. And Nora Needleman, she is kind of a snobby girl and not really Alice's friend. So that's a little recap of some of the characters in our story. Now let's go ahead and answer those trivia questions from last week. So we'll go through each one of the questions. They were, Pie, the shop, is located where? What city and what state? The answer is Ipswich, Pennsylvania. Question 2, what year did Pie, the shop, open? It opened in 1941. Number 3, what did Aunt Polly leave to Alice in her will? Her cat, Lardo. Number 4, how many Blueberry Awards did Aunt Polly win? 13. And finally, what was Aunt Polly's favorite fabric print? The answer was leopard print. All right, excellent, excellent. Now before we hop into our chapter summaries, let's go and ask our brand new batch of chapter trivia questions. And all these questions will be able to be answered in our summaries. Let's begin with our first question. Who is Alice's friend and partner in the investigation? What kind of pie was Mrs. Anderson, that's Alice's mom, making? What did Alice find under her radiator? What did Aunt Polly wear around her neck? And finally, who was interviewing Ruth Anderson when Alice came down the stairs? So who was interviewing Ruth Anderson when she came down the stairs? So let's see if you can answer some of these trivia questions as we go through chapters 4 through 6. Let's begin with chapter 4. How do you leave a recipe to a cat? Mrs. Anderson asked. Alice kept Lardo, that's the cat, in her room since her dad was allergic to cats. That night, the evening newspaper's headline read, Pie Queen leaves secret recipe to cat. In the middle of the night, Alice was awakened by a noise. She thought Lardo had knocked something over. When she turned on the light, Lardo was nowhere in sight, and nothing in her room seemed out of place. Alice was not the only one awake in the middle of the night, though. Mayor Needleman was suffering a bout of indigestion and had gotten up to make himself a Bromo seltzer. As he was looking out the window, he saw a big green Chevrolet roll by with the headlights turned off. When Alice woke up the next morning, she went to the kitchen to find her mother making a pie. Her mother wanted to win the next Blueberry Award. When Mrs. Anderson won her blueberry, she would have the good sense to sell the recipe and not leave it to a silly cat. Mrs. Anderson informed Alice that after 10 a.m. that morning, the pound was expecting Lardo to be dropped off. Alice went upstairs to feed Lardo his breakfast. Lardo was nowhere to be found, and her bedroom window was open. Alice noticed unmistakable mark of a cat's paw print on her window sill. Lardo had escaped. That's the end of chapter 4. Let's begin and continue with chapter 5. When Alice went downstairs to tell her mother about Lardo, her mother was talking to Sylvia De Soto, a reporter with Look magazine. Miss De Soto wanted to interview Mrs. Anderson about her sister, Polly, for an article she was writing. Sylvia De Soto was only interested in the pie crust recipe. Mrs. Anderson had no idea what her sister did with her recipe. For all she knew, she whispered in the cat's ear or tattooed it on his belly. Mrs. Anderson thought that Polly was a selfish woman who did a selfish thing. Mrs. Anderson let Sylvia De Soto know that she was making her first pie, which was chocolate cream, her husband's favorite. Mrs. Anderson had the strangest feeling that she met Sylvia De Soto somewhere before. Her name didn't ring a bell, but there was something very familiar about her face. Alice asked herself, if she was Lardo, where would she go? Since Pie the shop was Lardo's home, Alice would search there first. When Alice arrived at Pie the shop, the door was wide open. When she stepped into the shop, it was a total wreck. Broken dishes and pans were strewn across the floor. The pie safes were tipped over. Everything had been knocked off the shelves, and the pantry was even worse. Giant sacks of flour and sugar had been slashed open, and every basket and barrel overturned and dumped out. As Alice went upstairs to Polly's apartment, she noticed the door was ajar. Alice gently pushed it open with her shoe. As she stepped into the apartment, she noticed a tall figure in a dark cap, clutching a wooden baseball bat with both hands, winding up to take a swing at her head. Alice shrieked, "No!" falling to her knees, covering her face with both hands. When nothing happened, she peeked out between her fingers and saw Charlie Erdling staring down at her. Alice thought that Charlie had wrecked Aunt Polly's pie shop and apartment. Charlie did no such thing. It was like that when he got there. He noticed the door was open on his way to the ball field. He grabbed his bat and went upstairs to catch the burglar in the act. Alice looked around the room. Every cabinet and drawer had been yanked open and gone through. Alice thought that the burglar was after Polly's blueberry medals, since they were made of gold. Alice found the cardboard box empty on the rug, and the medals were still there, scattered haphazardly across the floor. Alice asked Charlie if he had seen Lardo in the apartment. Charlie had not. Alice told Charlie about the previous night and how she heard some thumps and then a metal kind of clink. They were going to go back to Alice's house to report a break-in, since Aunt Polly didn't have a phone. As they were leaving, Alice put the blueberry medals into a box and took them with her for safekeeping. That's the end of chapter 5. Now let's move on to chapter 6, and remember, keep looking for those trivia questions. Chapter 6. Sitting on the counter was the ugliest pie that Alice and Charlie had ever seen. The whole thing was lopsided. The edges of the crust burnt to a crisp, and in the middle was a pool of pale brown liquid with several lumps of what appeared to be butter floating in it like pale yellow icebergs. It was her mother's chocolate cream pie. Charlie told Alice that he was making deliveries all over town, that everyone was trying to win the blueberry. Alice and Charlie went up to her room to investigate the scene of the crime. Alice found a hoop earring for pierced ears. Alice's mother only wears clip-on earrings, and Alice didn't have her ear pierced yet. Chief Decker called and went to talk to Alice and Charlie about the key to the pie shop. The door showed no signs of forced entry, so a key must have been used. The door was unlocked, when Mr. Ogden went to pick up Lardo, so he locked the door from the inside and pulled it closed when he left. Alice's mother said there was only one key, and Polly wore it around her neck at all times. She was buried with the key. Alice informed her mother that Aunt Polly wasn't wearing the key when she was buried. Charlie had to pick up a few things for Miss Girk. Alice needed Charlie's help to find out who catnapped Lardo. That's the end of Chapter 6. So, thank you for tuning in for our summaries for Chapters 4 through 6 in our book for this month, Pie by Sarah Weeks. Along with each one of these fun chapters is a pie recipe. So I will be putting these following after this in our little movie. But then also I'll be putting them down below in the comments in case you decide you want to pick up the book, have some fun, and make your very own pie. Thank you again for tuning in for episode 2 of this month's Off the Page program, Book Club for Tweens. We'll see you next week with our next set of chapters every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Have a great week. See you. As promised, here is the first recipe, green tomato pie. Next up is sour cherry pie. And finally is huckleberry pie. These recipes will be posted in the comments below in case you would like to try your hand at making them. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week on Tuesday for the next round of chapters.